Whatever happened to Sunday dinner? You know, the kind where everyone gathered around the table, elbows tucked in, waiting for Grandma to serve something so hearty and satisfying you'd almost forget Monday was lurking around the corner. Somewhere between the invention of fast food, microwave dinners, and brunch culture, Sunday dinner seems to have lost its way. But today, we're diving deep into the culinary time machine to rediscover 20 forgotten Sunday dinners that nobody makes anymore. Let's see if we can bring back a little of that old school charm and maybe remind you of a meal or two you didn't even know you missed. Now, before we get into it, picture this. It's 1963. The TV is probably black and white, and there's a casserole dish sitting proudly in the center of the table. Enter the tuna noodle casserole. Once hailed as the epitome of convenience and flavor, at least according to the housewives of the time, this creamy, noodle-like concoction was a Sunday staple. Egg noodles swimming in a blend of condensed cream of mushroom soup, canned tuna, and peas, all baked with a crunchy topping of breadcrumbs or crushed potato chips. It was the ultimate comfort food. Sure, it might sound a little questionable today, but back then, it was a crowd pleaser. And if you were lucky, someone added a sprinkle of cheese on top for extra flair. Today, this dish might be met with skeptical looks, but for families in the 50s and 60s, it was pure gold, served on a Pyrex platter. Speaking of casseroles, how could we forget chicken a la king? This dish was practically a celebrity in mid-century kitchens. Rich, creamy, and served over toast, rice, or biscuits, it was the kind of meal that made you feel like royalty. It started with a velvety sauce made from butter, cream, and chicken broth, with chunks of chicken, pimientos, and mushrooms mixed in. The best part? It came together quickly, making it perfect for busy Sundays. However, it also had a knack for spilling onto your best church clothes or the tablecloth, making it a messy affair. Maybe that's why it's no longer a common sight, but oh, what a treat it was. Then there's the roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. It wasn't just a meal. It was an event. Imagine a roast beef slow-cooked to perfection, paired with those golden, fluffy Yorkshire puddings that were part bread, part science experiment. Made with a simple batter of eggs, flour, and milk, Yorkshire puddings would puff up dramatically in the oven, leaving everyone mesmerized. The key was using the drippings from the roast to flavor the puddings. If you didn't poke a hole in one to watch the steam escape, were you even doing it right? Nowadays, roast beef gets a nod at special occasions, but Yorkshire pudding? Let's just say it's been put out to pasture, and that's a real shame. And here's a blast from the past: ham loaf. Yes, you heard that right, ham loaf. Not quite a meatloaf, not quite a ham roast, but somehow a thing in its own right. The base was a mixture of ground ham and pork, bound together with breadcrumbs and eggs. The glaze was the secret weapon, usually a tangy mix of mustard, vinegar, and brown sugar that caramelized beautifully in the oven. A sweet, savory, slightly mysterious slice of nostalgia. Served with a side of scalloped potatoes or green beans, it was a meal that stuck with you, literally and figuratively. Why don't we see it anymore? Maybe because the idea of grinding up ham just doesn't appeal to the Instagram crowd. But for those who grew up with it, ham loaf is unforgettable. Now, who remembers Jell-O salad? Oh yes, this was the crown jewel of mid-century dining. It wasn't really a salad, and the vegetable component was often a lone piece of celery trapped in lime gelatin. Yet it was somehow essential to Sunday dinners. There were endless variations: lime Jell-O with shredded carrots, strawberry Jell-O with bananas, or if you were feeling fancy, lemon Jell-O with cottage cheese. Topped with whipped cream or left to jiggle on its own, it was as much a conversation piece as a side dish. It's a culinary mystery how gelatin with floating marshmallows, shredded carrots, and pineapple chunks ever became a thing. But for a while, it was the thing. And let's be honest, Even if it wobbled its way off the table, you kind of miss its weird charm, don't you? Let's not skip the stew pot. Whether it was beef, lamb, or chicken, a hearty stew simmering on the stove was practically the soundtrack of Sunday afternoons. The beauty of stew was its simplicity. You tossed in whatever was left in the fridge, added some stock, and hoped for the best. Potatoes, carrots, onions, celery, sometimes even a stray parsnip or turnip if Grandma was feeling adventurous. And somehow, it always turned out great. The long, slow cooking process brought out the deep flavors, and the smell alone could make your mouth water. These days, stew has been overshadowed by takeout and quick meals, but nothing beats a big bowl of homemade stew on a chilly Sunday evening. Now, here's a fun one: deviled crab. No, not crab cakes, not lobster rolls, but deviled crab. Think crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs, spices, and enough butter to make a cardiologist faint. It was stuffed back into the shell for presentation points, then baked until golden brown. It was a little bit fancy, a little bit retro, and a whole lot of delicious. It was the kind of dish you'd find at a seaside restaurant, but somehow made its way into Sunday dinner rotations. Today, it's rare to see it on menus, let alone in home kitchens. Maybe people got tired of hunting down crab shells, but this dish deserves a comeback. How about chicken fried steak? You know, steak battered like chicken, fried to perfection, and smothered in creamy gravy. It's the kind of meal that made you loosen your belt halfway through, but you didn't care because it was that good. The steak was usually a budget-friendly cut like cube steak, tenderized and seasoned before being dipped in flour and fried. Served with a side of mashed potatoes and green beans, it was pure comfort on a plate. These days, it seems like it's been relegated to diners, but back in the day, this was a Sunday showstopper. Let's take a moment to appreciate the forgotten hero of the bread world: cornbread dressing. Not stuffing, mind you, this is Southern-style dressing. A magical combination of crumbled cornbread, celery, onions, and broth, baked to crispy perfection. It wasn't just for Thanksgiving. It was a Sunday side dish that could steal the spotlight from any main course. Sadly, it's been overshadowed by box stuffing mixes. A real tragedy, because nothing compares to the homemade version: rich, savory, and just the right amount of crumbly. And then there's liver and onions. Stay with me here. Love it or hate it, this dish was a Sunday tradition for many. The liver was cooked until tender, or occasionally until it resembled shoe leather, paired with caramelized onions and served with a side of mashed potatoes. The key was getting the liver just right, a task that not everyone mastered. It was a love it or hate it meal, but it had its fans. Today, it's practically extinct. Coincidence? Or conspiracy? Let's talk about salmon patties. These crispy little cakes were a budget-friendly way to bring seafood to the table, made from canned salmon, breadcrumbs, and eggs. They were fried to golden perfection and served with a dollop of tartar sauce or ketchup, depending on how fancy you were feeling. Simple, satisfying, and sadly forgotten. They're easy to make, and with a little lemon juice and parsley, they could easily be a modern classic. And who could forget stuffed bell peppers? Bright green peppers filled with a mixture of ground beef, rice, and tomato sauce, baked until tender. It was the kind of meal that felt healthy before anyone was counting macros or carbs. Yet, it's mysteriously vanished from modern menus. Maybe people got tired of trying to make peppers stand up straight in the baking dish. Or maybe it's just too retro for today's trends. Either way, it's time for a comeback. Pot roast with vegetables deserves a spot on this list too. It was the definition of set it and forget it before slow cookers were a thing. Toss a roast, potatoes, carrots, and onions into the oven, and hours later, you had a meal that smelled so good it could wake the neighborhood. The gravy alone was worth the wait. These days, it seems to have been replaced by takeout, which is just sad. Remember Baked City? It was lasagna's laid-back cousin, layered with pasta, cheese, sauce, and sometimes meat. Easy to make, easy to love, and perfect for feeding a crowd. Yet, somehow, it's fallen out of favor. Maybe it just wasn't trendy enough for the Instagram food crowd. But let's face it, nothing beats a cheesy, bubbling dish of baked ziti fresh out of the oven. Let's not forget fried cabbage and sausage. This was a Sunday dinner for the no-frills crowd. Just sliced cabbage and sausage, fried up in a skillet with a little bit of seasoning. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. And it was cheap, which is probably why it made so many appearances back in the day. Add a slice of cornbread on the side, and you had a meal that was simple, but oh so satisfying. Now, how about chicken and dumplings? This dish was the epitome of comfort food, with tender chicken swimming in a rich broth topped with fluffy dumplings. The dumplings themselves were little pillows of dough that soaked up all the flavor. It was like a warm hug in a bowl. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone making it from scratch, which is a real shame because store-bought just isn't the same. Do you remember pork chops and applesauce? This unlikely pairing was a Sunday favorite in households across America. The sweet applesauce balanced the savory pork chops perfectly, and it was a great way to use up all those apples sitting in the fridge. Today, it feels more like a relic than a recipe, but maybe it's time to dust off the skillet and give it another go. And let's not forget shepherd's pie. Ground meat, peas, carrots, and gravy, topped with a layer of creamy mashed potatoes and baked until golden. It was hearty, simple, and delicious. Yet, it's been quietly edged out by more modern casseroles, which is frankly a travesty. Nothing beats the satisfaction of digging into a homemade shepherd's pie on a cold evening. Finally, we have baked ham with pineapple rings. A glazed ham adorned with canned pineapple rings and maraschino cherries was practically an art form back in the day. The glaze, a mix of brown sugar, mustard, and sometimes a splash of soda gave it a sweet, sticky finish. It wasn't just dinner. It was a centerpiece. But somewhere along the way, this quirky dish fell off the radar, and the world is a little less sweet because of it. And there you have it, 20 forgotten Sunday dinners that deserve a comeback. Some are quirky, some are questionable, but all of them are packed with nostalgia. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to dust off those old recipes, gather your family, and give one of these classics a try. As always, thank you for watching. If you like this trip down memory lane, hit that like button, share your favorite forgotten dish in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.